My parents are different. Can anybody relate to this? This is going to be a long story, consider it a novel lol. When my biological mother found out she was pregnant with me, she made the decision to give me up to my aunt and uncle to raise me, and I've been with them since I was born. My aunt and uncle are much older, they are in their 70s, and I'm 23F. I will be referring to my aunt as my mom and my uncle as my dad in this story. I'll be referring to my biological mother as Tammy. As a child, my parents introduced Tammy to me as my aunt, so growing up I always thought she was just my aunt. Tammy had 4 other kids, and biologically to me, they were my 2 older sisters, my older brother and little brother. Tammy was unstable, toxic, and a pathological liar. When we would go visit her 9/10, it would be chaos, her and her 3 teenagers going at it, often getting physical, resulting in the cops being called to her apartment. My parents planned to tell me who my biological mother was when I turned 18. They'd planned to hire a psychologist to break the news to me. But that's not how it went down. When I was in 8th grade, Tammy offered to give me rides to school in the mornings. The first day, she gave me a ride. On the way to the school, we had a normal conversation, but as we got to the drop-off line and I was about to get off of the car, she says, "You want to know who your real mother is?" I am, and that's how I found out. I'm very aware that there are kids out there with evil parents, which compared to them, my parents and my life was heaven. So I try not to be ungrateful, but at the same time I acknowledge that my parents' behavior and the condition of my home were not okay. My mom is a level 10 hoarder. Boxes and bags of junk and trash piled up to the ceiling, blocking hallways and filling every room. The fridge was a black hole of stains, mold, expired food, and roaches dead and alive in the food and all over the fridge. We also had dogs, and my mom never potty trained them nor took them outside, so there was dog urine and feces all over the floors. My mom also didn't clean, so the floors were black in filth. As I got older and went to other people's houses, I noticed none of their houses looked like mine. They all looked clean and actually looked like homes. I asked my mom why our home looked like this, and she'd always answer, "It's because we're poor." It never made sense. Just because we're poor doesn't mean we can't clean. And for someone who is poor, she sure had lots of things. I was often sick from food poisoning because our fridge was cross-contamination in a nutshell. I tried to plead with her many times to clean the house and that I would help her, but it never worked. I took it into my hands a few times and cleaned the house. It once took me 4 hours just to clean the fridge, just for it to go back to how it was in 2 days. Whenever I'd clean the house and throw out trash, she would take it out of the trash can and bring it back inside after I spent hours cleaning. I was so embarrassed of my home that I never invited any of my friends over. I'd go to their houses instead. The house I live in is divided into 2 houses. One side of the house is where me, my dad, and my mom lived. The other side of the house, my dad's brother, his wife, and their 3 children lived. Since I was young, my mom believed my aunt was stealing from her. If anything went missing, she would blame her. I believed my mom and what she told me. Until I turned 10, that's when my mom shifted her focus from my aunt to me. So from that point on, anything that went missing from the house, a hat, a sweater, the remote control, literally anything, I was blamed for it. This was a daily occurrence, and because she 100% believed I was stealing from her, she would retaliate and make my life miserable. Every day she would curse at me, hide her pots and pans so I couldn't cook, hide laundry detergent so I'd have to use my shampoo, she'd hide toilet paper and dish soap. Since I was a child with no job, I asked my dad if he could buy me laundry detergent, toilet paper, and he did. I tried to avoid my mom and stay in my room. I would only go out to use the bathroom or wash my clothes. I didn't really have an appetite, so I'd only eat once a day. When my dad would get home from work, he'd go buy food and get me something. Even though I avoided my mom, only stayed in my room, she still accused me for things that went missing. On many occasions I'd do homework in my room and she'd go in demanding me to give her the remote for her TV that I never took. She'd kick me out of my room so that she could watch her show in my room. I was so used to her doing that I wasn't even fazed, but the bizarre things my mom's done gave me these beyond terrifying nightmares of her. The most recent one was of her being possessed and doing things like climbing on walls and chasing me. It's very disturbing to say the least. Now about my dad. He was an alcoholic when I was a child, and although my dad has done good things for me, he's also done things that have ruined our relationship, which leaves me in the middle of wanting to appreciate him and my mom for the good things they did, but also being grossed out by their behavior that I don't want to be in contact with them. The first thing I remember is when I was about 6 years old. At that time my mom and me would sleep in one room and my dad would sleep in the other room. The rooms were next to each other. So every night for a good amount of days up at nighttime when I'd get out of the shower, I'd go to my room in a towel and try to get dressed. My mom would also be in the room with me. Then my dad would ask from his room, "Are you getting dressed?" And the first time I said yes and he replied, "I'm gonna go watch," and he giggled about it. One thing about my dad is he's always had a joking personality and talks with a joking tone. Even though I was about 6 years old, I didn't want him to come and watch me, and I'd cry, tell him to stop, but he wouldn't. He'd just stand there and laugh. Both of the rooms didn't have proper doors. His room didn't have a door at all, and my room had a wooden sliding door with no way to lock it. So when he did that, I remember getting this panic of what do I do, and having this thought process of his walking to my room. I don't have enough time to put my clothes on. Do I jump under my blanket and end up hiding behind my towel and crying while he laughed? My mom never told him to stop. The only time she said anything was when I was hyperventilating. She told me, "Calm down, he's just joking." I tried to make excuses for things my dad's done, and I could have made an excuse for that if it wasn't for all the other weird, inappropriate things he's done. There was a time I was about 10 years old. It was a Saturday morning. I was laying on my stomach. My parents walk in my room saying, "Come eat." They had never done that before. I hear my mom walk out of the room and my dad kneeled on my bed, squeezed my butt and giggled about it. Although some could excuse that as a playful gesture, I could have agreed, but because of other things he's done makes me feel gross about him having had done that. Another time was when I was in middle school, 6th. I had a lice infestation. I got this lice shampoo and washed my hair. Got out the shower so my mom could run a lice comb through my hair. I was in a towel. I was gonna hop back in and rinse off. So we're in the kitchen, out of all places, and I'm sitting on a chair while she's combing my hair, and no exaggeration, lice is just falling out of my head, what looked like hundreds falling down. My dad decides he wants to help by picking lice off me, and there was one that landed above the towel that was wrapped around me, and I just remember he was trying to grab it and pick it off, but it was hard to get it. It was sliding into my towel, so I just naturally lowered my towel, but my nipple was exposed, and he picked it off my nipple and giggled about it, and it made me feel gross considering there's a billion more lice falling out of my head. He could have picked any other one of them. My dad and mom always used to watch novelas, which are drama shows in Spanish. For some reason those novelas always tend to have a rape scene. So whenever a rape scene would show on TV and the woman would be crying, my dad would say something like "Ia andel cabrona." I don't know how to translate that, but basically saying it's a good thing she's being raped. A lot of these things started to happen when I was 10, because another thing that he started to do at that age was call me chichona and nalgona, translating to big breast, big, but he'd even say it in front of my mom and she would laugh. Whenever I'd walk in or out of the room, he wouldn't look at my face, only my breasts and my butt, and my mom would do it too. I know lots of parents admire their kids, like, "Wow, my baby got so big," but what they were doing didn't feel innocent, at least not my dad. It felt so gross. So I started walking into the room with my arms crossed to cover my chest and walked out of the room backwards to avoid them looking at my butt, and they'd just laugh at me like it was funny. There was one thing my dad said that I've never understood, and if he said it in the way I think he did, it's another reason I don't want to be around him. So, again, I'm 10 years old, and my dad got a call from a neighbor saying 2 of his cousins named Antonio and Pedro just got here from Mexico. He said Pedro needed a place to stay and asked if he could rent him a room. Since the house we live in has 2 extra rooms not connected to the house out in the yard. My dad agrees and brings Pedro to show him the room outside. I went out curious to see who was moving in when Pedro saw me, stopped and just stared at me for a while. The way he was staring felt off. The room that he would be renting didn't have a kitchen or bathroom, so my parents gave him a key to our house and access to use the bathroom. Around this time my parents would often leave me home for hours at a time. They would go over to families' houses, to the store, or to get something to eat, leaving Pedro with full access to the house while I'm alone in it. Thankfully nothing too serious happened, considering how dangerous that was. But there was a night where my parents threw a party. Everyone was out in the yard drinking, music, and me and my friend, who in this story I'll call Jen. We were both in my room playing when we needed to go to the bathroom, but someone was in there and had been for a long time. We knocked on the bathroom door and Pedro answered. He had been drinking, his eyes were bloodshot, and he had a Bud Light can on the bathroom sink. Jen went in to use the bathroom first, and I waited outside of the door. Pedro started talking to me and acting like a weird drunk, then Jen opened the door and I went in to use the bathroom. I was thinking how Jen was outside waiting for me and he might be doing the same thing to her. When I opened the door, Jen had already gone to my room and only Pedro was standing there. He put me against the wall and started to kiss me, trying to shove his tongue in my mouth, but I had my lips pressed together super tight so he wasn't able to. When he stopped kissing me, I casually walked back to my room frightened. I remember feeling extremely scared, but I didn't want him to know it. I couldn't even lock my door since it was a sliding wooden door with no lock. I walked in my room trying to make it seem like nothing was wrong, but I grabbed my phone and called my neighbor, who was my friend at the time, who I'll call Maria in this story. I told her what happened. I also told my friend Jen, who was with me, what happened, trying to be discreet, but I started crying cause I was scared. Maria told me to tell my parents, but I didn't want them to know what happened. I already felt sexualized by my dad. The last thing I wanted to do was tell him that this man kissed me. So I went to the kitchen and looked for a knife. I found this serrated kitchen knife that was dull at the tip, took it to my room and told Jen, if he comes into the room I'm gonna stab him. I don't know where that came from, but I'd like to think I was prepared to defend myself against this weirdo who had kissed me 10 minutes ago and was still in my house. I had Jen go with me outside into one of the other rooms and hide with me. We were in that room in the dark and eventually went back inside. I never told my parents what happened, but they eventually found out because my neighbor Maria, who I called that day and told her what happened, called my mom and told her what happened. My mom cried hysterically as if she couldn't believe this strange man she gave access to our house could do that. But I denied it all. I felt so uncomfortable with them knowing. Anyways, before Pedro kissed me, there was a day where him and my dad were outside in front of the garage. I was next to them, behind them. Kids were going home from school at that time. There was a girl, her backpack, maybe in middle school, and she was walking across the street from our house when my dad points her out to Pedro and says, "Why Asar?" translating to, "And that one?" Pedro takes a few steps forward and stares at her like he stared at me the day he moved in. I don't know what my dad meant by that. I can only assume, and it doesn't look good. I can only ask myself, did my dad know that Pedro was a pedophile, and if so, why let him live in our house, and why did he act surprised when he found out Pedro kissed me? And also, what did he mean by "and that one"? When referring to the girl walking past our house, your guess is as good as mine. The thing about my parents is they can be noticeably nice. And them being much older makes them look like a nice older couple. So when I would try to speak about what was happening at home to a close friend, family member, I was almost immediately shut off by, "No, your mom is so nice. You're trying to say that little old lady does those mean things you say she does? I don't believe you. Your dad is so nice. My dad would never pay to fix my car like yours did. You are so lucky. You need to appreciate them." When I moved out at 19, I was lonely, and because I have an attachment to my parents, I can only recognize as the manipulation, but also the appreciation I have for the good things they've done. I was in constant communication with them, and whenever I needed money, my dad would send. He let me know I could move back if I wanted. My dad's brother, his wife, and their 3 kids moved out, so I was able to move into the house they lived in. It is the same house as my parents, but it is divided into 2 houses, giving me privacy. Also, I thought, my dad would casually spy on me through a broken piece of the door. He told me one day, "I was looking at you watching TV through the door." So later that night I taped over the hole he was looking at me through, and the next day he questioned why I covered it. If I go out at night, he questions me about it, wanting to know where I was. It annoys me because I'm an adult, I pay you rent. Why is he making it a big deal that I went out, as if I went out behind his back? I never tried to hide it. I believed I was free to come and go as I pleased, considering I paid rent. His behavior is just as creepy as it used to be, hasn't changed, and has never showed me the privacy I need as a woman, nor the respect. He brings me food every day to my door, even if it's his old lunch from work. I see it as an excuse or another form of manipulation. I told him and my mom many times, "Don't bring me food, I have food here," resulting in my mom saying I should just accept the food and not hurt his feelings. Apparently saying I have food at home, "Don't bring me food," would cause him to get upset and sad, but he'd gaff because he's creeping me out. I recently started to ignore him when he comes to my door, and my mom came a couple days ago to my door and said, "I see now that you don't want to talk to us, and all I want to say is God bless you." And though that may sound like a mature response to the situation from her, it's not. She will continue acting out. I chose to live here because financially, it's the smarter choice, but putting up with my parents is seriously taking a hit at my mental health. And then there's the guilt of, will I take care of my parents when they need to be cared for? And I would have, but after all they've done, it's going to be hard to even consider that. And now I possibly stay with the guilt of choosing to possibly not take care of them as they get older. Edit. Thank you all so much for the encouraging comments. I feel so spoiled with support. Red Heart Hash.